What I know is that for as long as I've been alive, and a lot longer than that, the general path of social and political life in America, and the general path of jurisprudence in this country, has been toward more freedom, more liberty, and more rights. And the question that I think has now been called is, did we just live to see the high watermark of liberty and freedom and rights in this country? The moment that will be remembered as the furthest we got before things started moving the other way? Or will that wave recede and we'll get even further? I think that's the question in front of us. So as somebody who believes in a woman's right to choose, as somebody who believes in the decision we made as a society, not just the decision that was made in the court, but I would argue a decision that we have made, at least a majority of us are on board with as a society, that even if we cannot come into alignment on the incredibly complex, difficult, philosophical, moral, and sometimes spiritual questions over things like where to draw a line when deciding about terminating a pregnancy, that we could at least agree on who gets to draw that line. I trust women to draw that line. For the last 50 years, America has trusted women to draw that line, has recognized that as a right. And now it would appear that the court is poised to take that understanding away. And of course, not only is that a source of fear for so many Americans, for so many women, but it raises the question about what other rights are going to be put on the table. I was with the Spectrum folks earlier. We didn't get a chance to really dig into this, but I know how this is hitting the LGBTQ plus community. Especially because unlike some rights that we have had for decades, that if you're an undergraduate age student, you have not known a country that didn't have those rights. Some of the rights that have come to the queer community are quite new. You know, when I became mayor of South Bend, it wasn't that long ago. The idea that I could be married, certainly the idea that I could be a confirmed cabinet member from Indiana, talking about my 2 kids that my husband and I are raising, would have been somewhere between unlikely and preposterous. And that possibility was secured by an action of the court. And so we know how fragile that is. And I think we're all feeling, in the face of our political institutions and our supposedly not very political institutions, our judicial institutions, having been shaky for some time, that this is not theoretical. It's been talked about in theoretical terms up until now, but this is not theoretical. This is going to shape what our lives are going to be like, as all political and judicial decisions, of course, do. But sometimes they get kicked around on political TV shows and sometimes in academic environments as if it's theory, and it's not, is it? It's how our lives are going to go. Then you have the agenda that has led to things like the Don't Say Gay bill, which, in my view, is a little narrower, though not less destructive, but a little bit narrower than the 40-year-long conservative political project that is culminating in what we're seeing perhaps about to happen to Roe. And what I mean by that is there's a more superficial political pattern that I think has driven some of the politics of the behavior of people like these people in Florida with the Don't Say Gay bill. And that is, when all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a culture war. So you got a political faction that really doesn't have a lot of answers for many of the questions that people are wrestling with. They love talking about gas prices, but they don't have an answer on gas prices. They don't have an answer on inflation. Many of them answered our call for bipartisan infrastructure work with a no. Haven't seen an answer on what to do about the price of prescription drugs. They voted against lowering that. Don't have an answer on what to do about the cost of childcare. Don't have a great answer on taxes. Actually want to raise taxes for the poor. That's a new one. I thought I'd seen it all. Then I saw Senator Scott's proposal to raise taxes for the poor. That's not great territory for them to be debating on. So what do? They find somebody vulnerable and pick on them, which at the moment is largely the trans community. And they find something to talk about which can go between the laughable, like is Donald Duck going to make your kid gay, to the incredibly dark, which is the suggestion that the very presence of someone who is gender nonconforming or trans or gay or lesbian or otherwise different, that the very existence of somebody like that is an adult subject, right? That if my kids in, let's say, a first grade classroom were to mention in passing that over the weekend they had a great time going with their dads to the zoo, that they would have somehow, by saying that, uttered something age inappropriate and get us really fired up about that fight. And it's just politics. It's motivated by just politics. So I guess what I'm saying is we're seeing a lot of overlapping patterns that are all pointing in the direction that the worst tendencies in human politics always have, which is to take rights and freedoms away and to make it harder for vulnerable people in the service of some imagined political gain. And there are two answers to that kind of thing. Two kinds of answers, I would argue. One answer is to argue against it and fight against it, which is what I do, and people who are involved in politics and public life go on television and do. And the other is to see to it that that is in fact not a way to gain power politically. Because, of course, the biggest test of any of these tactics isn't were they well argued, were they convincing? The biggest test of these tactics is, did they work? And I'm going to be careful saying anything more about that because I'm here in my capacity as a federal official and I'm not here to talk about campaigns. But I will say, just as a matter of policy and as a matter of the kind of political maneuvering that takes place among officials, certainly in Washington, ultimately, if things that hurt people help you get more power, people will continue to do them. And the rest is up to us.
I mean, what can I really say that Pete Buttigieg hasn't already said better? But there's one thing in this speech that really struck me, one thing that I hadn't considered, and that is the notion that we've already reached our high watermark in the United States in terms of what rights Americans will be able to enjoy. And I know it's a strange thing to think about because for our entire history as a country, we've moved forward, we've expanded rights, and yet now, for the first time in American history, those rights that we've enjoyed for decades are being stripped away, they're being contracted. And I know what you're thinking. How could the party that lavishes praise onto itself for supporting freedom and liberty be systematically stripping rights away from people? Don't they care about freedom? No. The fact is that it was never about freedom. Freedom was just a buzzword, a shiny veneer that they used to cover for the fact that what they're really interested in is ensuring that everyone else conforms to their beliefs. They want freedom of religion so long as it's Christianity. They want freedom of speech so long as that speech conforms to Republican values. In reality, it was never about freedom. It was simply about their own politics and influence and power. And that's not just me opining. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and the Republican-led legislature in Florida literally punished Disney for daring to criticize their Don't Say Gay bill, moving immediately to strip the company of its self-governing status. And of course, Republicans in states across the country have imposed abortion bans, none of which, literally zero, enjoy the support of the majority of those citizens in each state. There's not a single state in the country where support for overturning Roe exceeds even 30%, because for the umpteenth time, this is not about following the will of the people, because it quite literally doesn't follow the will of the people. It's about imposing the will of a small faction of far-right Christo-fascist theocrats onto everyone else. Now, while I think that they've skated by over the years with stupid culture war attacks about socialism and wars on Christmas and migrant caravans that were, to some degree or another, effective, what they've done now will backfire. This isn't just blocking progress, it is rolling progress back. It's taking women's reproductive rights, economic freedom, rights to privacy, and their very bodily autonomy away from them. This is not a left versus right issue, this is an issue of basic humanity. It's evidence that Republicans won't just stop at Roe. They'll come after your right to use contraception, the rights of same-sex couples to marry, the rights of interracial couples to marry. Everything is on the chopping block. What they've done thus far isn't their endgame, it is a blueprint. So look, I understand that so often your politics are your identity, but my message to conservatives is this. At what point is the rubber stamp vote for the Republican on the ballot for your team worth all of this? Worth telling women what they can or can't do with their bodies? Worth setting the precedent that the government can dictate your health care? This isn't about political party anymore, it's about basic fundamental freedom. If you're for that, then there is only one party you should consider supporting right now, and it's not the one that's in the process of stripping rights away from Americans. To see more videos like this, click the subscribe button right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work, subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. I cover the most important stories each week, and my guest is always one of the top political figures, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, Katie Porter, Cory Booker, and so many more. The podcast link is also right here on this screen, so give it a listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.